My name is Natasha. I am 31 years old. And for 4 years my parents took a portion of my salary every single month to fund my brother's house while telling me it was a family investment that would one day benefit all of us equally. Welcome to Hidden Truth Revenge, where the truth always finds a way. If stories of family betrayal, financial manipulation, and quiet justice touch your heart, then stay with me until the end. This one begins at a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening when I was 24 years old and did not yet understand that love and honesty are not always the same thing in a family that has learned to call one by the name of the other. I had just started my first real job. Not a student job or a temporary placement or the in-between things that the years between education and actual career tend to produce. A real job with a salary and a title and the particular mixture of exhaustion and pride that comes from spending your first month inside something you have been working toward for years. I was a junior financial analyst at a firm that was serious about its work and expected seriousness in return, and I had given it everything I had across the first month and had come home on that Tuesday evening with the specific tiredness of someone who has been fully present in their work for 30 consecutive days and is only now, sitting in a familiar kitchen, allowing themselves to feel it. My mother made my favorite meal. The specific one she only made when something was being celebrated or when something was being asked for, and I had lived in that house long enough to know the difference between the two occasions but had not yet learned to identify which one I was in until I was already inside it. My father sat at the head of the table with the particular posture of a man who has something to say and has decided that the saying of it should happen after the eating rather than before, which meant the meal had a quality of waiting underneath its warmth, the specific anticipatory tension of a family dinner that has an agenda that has not yet been announced. My brother Daniel was there. He was 27 and had been talking for 2 years about buying a house, the specific house, a property in a neighborhood he had identified as the right neighborhood at the right price at the right moment in his life, and the talking about it had the quality that Daniel's talking about things always had, which was the complete confidence of someone who has decided what he wants and has not yet fully reckoned with the question of how it is going to be paid for. After the meal my father folded his hands on the table. He said he wanted to talk about something important. He said the family had been discussing Daniel's house and had decided that the right thing to do was to support him in purchasing it because Daniel was at the stage of his life where stability mattered and the house was a good investment in family-supported family when the opportunity was real and the timing was right. He said they had worked out a plan. The plan was this. Daniel would take out a mortgage for the portion of the house price that the bank would cover. The remaining portion, the deposit and the associated costs, would be funded through a family contribution. The family contribution would come from a monthly arrangement where each working member of the family contributed a fixed amount from their salary into a shared account designated for the house. My mother contributed from her part-time work. My father contributed from his income. And I, as the newest working member of the family with a real salary for the first time, would contribute 15% of my monthly take-home pay. My father said it clearly and with the warmth of someone presenting something he genuinely believed was fair and was asking me to see as fair alongside him. My mother said it was an investment in the family. She said Daniel would pay it back when he was able. She said this was what families did for each other. I was 24 years old. I was sitting at a table where my favorite meal had just been made and my father was looking at me with the expectant warmth of a man who believes he is offering his daughter an opportunity to participate in something meaningful, and my mother was nodding with the gentle certainty of a woman who has already decided how this conversation ends. I said yes. Not because I had thought it through. Not because I had calculated what 15% of my salary across an indefinite period would cost me or what it would prevent me from building for myself. Because I was 24 and I loved my family and the meal was my favorite and my father's hands were folded on the table with the specific dignity of a man making a serious proposal, and saying no to that felt like saying no to something larger than a financial arrangement. I said yes and my mother smiled and my father nodded and Daniel said thanks Nat in the easy way of someone who has received what he expected to receive and is already thinking about the next step. I drove home that night to my small rented apartment and I sat at my desk and I did the calculation I had not done at the table. 15% of my monthly take-home pay was not a small number. It was the number that sat between managing and not managing, the number whose presence or absence determined whether the month ended with something remaining or with nothing remaining, and the particular anxiety of someone who is learning for the first time what it costs to be a person in the world without the cushion of a family home to return to. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Daniel would pay it back. I told myself family invested in family and that the investment would return to me in ways that might not be financial but would be real. I told myself these things for 4 years. The 4 years. The contribution started the month after the kitchen table conversation and continued without interruption for 48 months. I want to tell you about those 48 months honestly because I think the honest version is more important than the version where I summarize them quickly and move to the resolution, because the 48 months were not a footnote. They were the story. They were the 4 years of my mid-20s during which most of the people I knew were building the foundations of their adult financial lives, and I was contributing 15% of my salary to a shared account every month and telling myself it was temporary. I did not buy furniture for my apartment in year 1 because I could not afford the furniture I wanted and was not willing to buy furniture I did not want when the money I was contributing every month would have made the furniture I wanted possible. I ate at my desk more evenings than I ate at a table. I did not take the professional development course in year 2 that my firm offered at a subsidized rate because the remaining cost after subsidy was still more than I could manage in the months when the contribution had been particularly tight. Daniel moved into the house in month 7 of the arrangement. He had a housewarming. My parents attended. I attended. I stood in the kitchen of the house that my 15% had helped purchase and I ate the food Daniel had provided and I said it was a beautiful place and I meant it and I went home to my apartment and I did not think about the calculation I had done at my desk in month 1 because thinking about it produced a feeling I was not ready to have. In year 3 I asked my father when the arrangement was likely to end. I asked it carefully, the way I asked difficult questions of my parents, directly but without any edge that could be received as accusation. My father said Daniel was getting established and that these things took time and that the family was grateful for my contribution and that it would not be forgotten. It would not be forgotten. I filed that phrase away the way I filed most things, quietly and completely, in the specific internal record I had been keeping without deciding to keep it since I was old enough to understand that some things needed to be remembered accurately rather than in the softened versions that families prefer. In year 4 I became a senior analyst. My salary increased. The contribution amount, which had been set as a percentage rather than a fixed number, increased proportionally. I did not say anything about this. I continued contributing. I continued telling myself it was temporary. In month 47 my friend Priya, who had started working at the same time as me and who had not been contributing 15% of her salary to a family house fund, bought her own apartment. I attended her housewarming. I stood in her kitchen and looked at what 4 years of keeping her own salary had made possible and I felt something I had been not feeling for 4 years arrive all at once, not with drama but with the specific weight of something that has been accumulating quietly and has finally reached the point where it cannot be held back by the act of not looking at it. I went home that evening and I opened my laptop and I did the calculation I had not done since month 1. 48 months. 15% of my salary, increasing with each pay rise. The total amount I had contributed to the shared account over 4 years. The number on my screen was larger than I had allowed myself to imagine. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I opened my bank statements. All 48 of them. And I started building a document. I spent 2 weeks building the document. Not because the mathematics were complicated. The mathematics were straightforward in the specific way that things are straightforward when you have 48 bank statements and a consistent percentage and a salary history that your employer provides on request and that I had requested on a Tuesday morning without telling anyone why I was requesting it. The mathematics took 3 hours. What took 2 weeks was everything else. I pulled every piece of documentation connected to the arrangement. The account statements for the shared family account, which I had access to as a contributing member and which showed 48 months of deposits from my account alongside deposits from my parents and no deposits from Daniel, who had been the beneficiary of the arrangement and had not contributed to it since moving in because my father had decided that Daniel getting established was sufficient contribution for the time being. I pulled the property records for Daniel's house, which were public, and which showed the purchase price and the mortgage amount and the gap between those two numbers that the family contribution had covered. I calculated what portion of that gap my contribution specifically had covered based on the proportional breakdown of what each family member had deposited across 48 months. I built a timeline. Month by month across 4 years. What I had contributed. What I had not been able to do with what I had contributed. The furniture I had not bought. The professional development course I had not taken. The apartment deposit I had not been able to save because saving an apartment deposit while contributing 15% of your salary to someone else's house requires a mathematical miracle that my salary had not been able to produce. I pulled Priya's apartment listing from the property website. Not to be petty. To have a concrete and specific illustration of what 4 years of keeping your own salary made possible compared to 4 years of contributing it to someone else's property. The apartments were comparable in size and neighborhood. The prices were comparable. The difference was 48 months of 15%. The document was 31 pages when I finished. I printed it and put it in a plain folder, and I called my parents and told them I would like to come for Sunday dinner. The Sunday dinner. My mother made a good meal. She always made a good meal on Sundays, and I ate it with genuine appreciation because whatever was about to happen at that table, the food had nothing to do with it, and my mother's cooking deserved to be received on its own terms. Daniel was there. My parents had not known I wanted him there specifically, but he came most Sundays and he was there, and I was glad because what I had to say needed to be said in front of everyone who had been part of the arrangement rather than in the managed sequence of individual conversations that would have allowed each person to hear a version filtered through whoever they had spoken to first. After the meal, I put the folder on the table. My father looked at it. My mother looked at it. Daniel looked at it and then looked at me with the expression of someone who has not been expecting anything and is recalibrating in real time. I said, I want to talk about the family contribution arrangement. I have been thinking about it for some time, and I have put together some documentation that I would like to share before I say what I need to say. My father said, Natasha, we are family. We do not need documentation for family conversations. I said, I think this particular family conversation is better with documentation than without it. I would like you to look at what is in the folder before we discuss anything further. He opened the folder. My mother looked over his shoulder. Daniel looked at the table. I let them read. It took 12 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall the way I watch clocks when I am waiting for something and want to know how long the waiting is lasting. 12 minutes of my father and mother moving through 31 pages of 4 years documented precisely and completely. When my father looked up, his face had the quality of a man who has received information he cannot argue with and is deciding how to respond to that specific situation. He said, these numbers. I said, are accurate. They come from my bank statements and the shared account records and the property registry and my salary history from my employer. Everything in the document is verifiable independently. He said, we always intended to pay you back. I said, I know you intended to. I want to ask you something about the intention. In 48 months the intention was mentioned twice. Once when the arrangement was proposed and once when I asked you in year 3 when it might end. In 48 months Daniel has not made a single deposit into the shared account that was supposedly a family investment. In 48 months the arrangement has not been discussed, reviewed, or adjusted in any way that reflected either the passage of time or the change in my salary. I would like to understand what paying back actually meant in practical terms, because the practical terms as I understand them from the document in front of you are that I contributed this amount across 4 years and have received nothing in return. My mother said, Natasha, we did not know it was this much. I said, I know you did not know because nobody calculated it. I calculated it 2 weeks ago and it took 3 hours. It was available to be calculated for 4 years and nobody calculated it because calculating it would have produced this document, and this document would have required a conversation that was more difficult than the conversation we had at this table 4 years ago when you made my favorite meal and asked me to contribute 15% of my salary to my brother's house. The table was very quiet. Daniel said, Nat. I looked at him. He said, I did not know it was this much either. I said, I believe you. I believe all of you did not know it was this much because not knowing was more comfortable than knowing, and the arrangement was structured in a way that made not knowing easy. 15% sounds like a reasonable portion. It does not sound like this number. But it is this number, and it has been this number for 4 years, and I am the only person at this table who has been living with what this number actually means in a life. I said, I am not here to create a permanent rupture. I am not here to tell you that the 4 years cannot be recovered from or that the family cannot be repaired. I am here because I have been carrying something for 4 years that was never fairly distributed and I need it to be acknowledged before I can continue carrying anything with this family. My father put the document down on the table. He said, "What do you want us to do?" I said, "I want 3 things. I want the arrangement to end immediately. I want the amount I have contributed to be acknowledged formally in writing by the family as a debt that exists and that will be addressed in a specific and documented way rather than in the vague language of intention. And I want Daniel to be part of that acknowledgement because the house is his and the debt is connected to his house and he is an adult and adults are responsible for the debts connected to their assets." Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then my father said, "That is fair." He said it quietly. Not with the warmth of the kitchen table 4 years ago when he had proposed the arrangement with folded hands and the dignity of a man making a serious proposal. With the specific quiet of a man who has read 31 pages and has understood that fair is the only available word for what is in those 31 pages. My mother said, "I am sorry, Natasha. I did not think about what it was costing you. I thought about Daniel and what he needed and I did not think carefully enough about what we were asking of you." I said, "I know. I believe that. What I need going forward is for thinking carefully about what you are asking of me to become something that happens before the asking rather than after the document." Daniel looked at the folder for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "I will pay you back. All of it. I do not know the timeline yet, but I want you to know that I am saying it as a commitment, not as an intention." I looked at him. I said, "I know the difference. I am going to hold you to the commitment." He said, "I know you are." The agreement. We drew up a formal acknowledgement the following week. Not through lawyers, though I had consulted one before Sunday dinner to understand what my options were. A written family agreement witnessed by an independent third party that documented the amount, acknowledged it as a debt, and outlined a repayment schedule that Daniel had proposed and that I had reviewed and found realistic. My father signed it. My mother signed it. Daniel signed it. I signed it. The independent witness signed it. I have the signed copy in the same folder as the 31-page document. The arrangement ended the month after Sunday dinner. My salary has been entirely mine for 8 months now. I have bought the furniture I wanted. I have enrolled in the professional development program my firm offered. I am saving for an apartment deposit that is growing at a rate that would not have been possible across the previous 4 years. Daniel makes his monthly repayment on the 1st of each month without exception. He has not missed one. I receive each payment with the specific feeling of someone who has stopped absorbing a cost that was never fairly hers and is watching the correction happen in real and documented increments. My parents and I have a different relationship now than we had for the 4 years of the arrangement. Not a damaged one. A more honest one. The specific honesty of people who have had a difficult conversation and have come out of it with a clearer understanding of each other than they had before the conversation was necessary. My mother calls every Sunday. We talk about ordinary things and occasionally about harder things, and the harder things are harder now in the way that things are harder when they are said directly rather than managed around, but the hardness is honest, and honesty, I have come to understand, is a better foundation than comfort built on things that are not being said. My father asked me recently what had made me decide to put it all in a document rather than simply having a conversation. I told him because a conversation without documentation is a conversation that can be remembered differently by different people depending on what they need to remember. A document is a document. It says what it says regardless of what anyone needs it to say. He said, "You get that from me." I said, "I know." He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh about something connected to the Sunday dinner, and it had the quality of a laugh that has traveled through something difficult to arrive and is more genuine for the traveling. I am still in my rented apartment. The deposit is growing. The repayments are arriving. The furniture is exactly what I wanted. Some things take 4 years longer than they should. But they still arrive. And they are yours when they do. If someone in your family used your generosity as a budget line and called it love, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next one. This is Hidden Truth Revenge, where the truth always finds a way.